Yeah, we're back. Aaron, you're back from the NBA Finals.
I was at the NBA Finals. Yes, I was. And contrary to some
There's
uh,
some conspiracy theories about that.
contrary conspiracy theories, you think I would pay for an NBA final? Like, come on, people. I was lucky enough to get free tickets. I seized the opportunity to see for the first and last time in my life an NBA Finals game, and I was there. I was a witness to a historic night. But to be honest with you, listen, I'm just a fan of basketball. I've never been a fan of any particular team unless it's the British Columbia Lions of the Canadian Football League, which is a throwback. But I wanted the series to go longer because I think it's just a great series, and the Spurs are an exciting team. But hey, it was the next time, and it was an amazing performance, and I got to witness it.
So you're not a member of the Epstein class.
I'm not a member of the Epstein class. No.
Yeah, I mean, I thought, I wasn't like a fan of either team, but I figured, 53 years, the Knicks should win. And then I started watching the MSG games and seeing pretty much like the guest list of Zorro Ranch and Epstein Island appear courtside, along with some of the most odious bandwagon characters like Taylor Swift and the Haim sisters. It really kind of curdled the whole experience. And I think for a lot of people, it kind of made people sour on the whole Knicks Cinderella rise to championship status. Jerry Seinfeld declaring that
it
doesn't exist. Yeah. Howard Lutnick being on the floor.
And of course, Trump, the one
DJ Khaled, they're like, him and DJ Khaled signaling to each other. Yeah. And Trump.
Yeah. Well, listen, it's exciting, living in New York, it is pretty exciting to see. And they're such a likable team. So, I'm definitely on the band. I am on the bandwagon, but I have to say also being in San Antonio, working class military town, I think more than half the arena were like obnoxious Knicks fans. And there was something I thought really unfair about that too. Like people in their own city can't afford to go, and like this gentrified fan base comes in and like takes over the arena. It was quite something. But anyway, plenty more sporting action this summer with the World Cup going on too, and Trump making sure to politicize that by like making the Iranian team not even stay in the country when they're playing games, that they have to leave as soon as they're done playing.
The Iranian team has to cross the border every day from Tijuana to San Diego or El Centro. And then they have to play in LA, which is the base of the monarchist lunatics who are out there like heckling them and waving Israeli flags at their bus. It feels deliberate. It's like making the Cuban national team play in Miami.
Yeah. I hope Iran inserted something about that into the memorandum of understanding that they just signed with Trump for him to lay off the Iranian national team. It's ridiculous. Talk about like, if you're trying to, establish diplomatic ties during the biggest sporting event in the world, you're going to force the Iranian team to leave the country because their government is one you're trying to overthrow. So maybe the Trump administration will be walking that one back. And if they're not, that will speak to how unserious they are about a peace deal with Iran, which they're now claiming to be entering into.
Yeah, 15 members of the team, the training staff were denied visas. There were, efforts to recruit the Iranian women's team in the past, and other Iranian teams have been kind of manipulated and messed with. I think there were strange interrogations of the Iranian women's soccer team in the Women's World Cup. So there's no way to remove politics from FIFA. And then you have what's his name, Gianno Infante, or the head of FIFA, one of the most corrupt organizations in the world, is a member of Trump's Board of Peace, which is a obvious Trump corruption racket in which FIFA paid $1 billion to be a part of it and signed off on the destruction or the continued ethnic cleansing and genocide in Gaza, after over 200 Palestinian athletes were killed in Gaza, including many footballers deliberately targeted. So the corruption is so extreme, it's really hard to enjoy. I want to talk later about UFC, but not because, I want to talk about the sport, but because it was such a significant event on Trump's 80th birthday, and really provided a perfect microcosm of what MAGA has become at this point. But I think, since you brought up the Iran deal, or if to the extent it's even a deal, right now it's a memorandum of understanding, which is a very odd way of striking a ceasefire or moving towards a ceasefire. We should talk about that. So, I mean, what's your initial reaction, given that we know very little about the contents of the deal and are getting different narratives about its contents from the Iranian and U.S. sides?
I think the only significance is that Trump is admitting that he lost his regime change war. This is him putting that in writing, essentially, because the war was launched in late February with Trump claiming that when we're done here, to the people of Iran, you will take over. And so he was calling for regime change, and that failed. And when the kinetic part of the war failed, he then tried this oil blockade to prevent Iran from exporting any oil. And I think he was trying to wait out to see if Iran's economy would collapse under the combination of his blockade, the damage from his bombing, and of course his crippling sanctions. And that didn't work. And Iran's leverage over the Strait of Hormuz proved to be just too strong, along with its striking of U.S. military assets in the region and the threat it posed to Trump's Gulf allies, because he basically put them on the front lines of his regime change war alongside Israel. So he failed. And this memorandum of understanding essentially restores the status quo from before he started bombing. So essentially he's admitting defeat of the regime change war, but is he opening a new chapter in U.S.-Iran relations? Is he going to lift these crippling sanctions that are designed to destabilize Iran? No. And I think that's pretty clear even from listening to J.D. Vance today, who is like inside the cabinet, inside the Trump's circle, is, widely considered to be the most anti-interventionist. But the way he's talking, the policy has not changed. That, while Iran has been willing to accept limits on its nuclear program for a long time, while Iran's been willing to accept limits on its nuclear program, the U.S. won't accept Iran's resistance to Israeli dominance. And because Iran refuses to capitulate on that front, Iran will continue to be targeted for regime change. And so I just don't think that aspect is changing. So it's a pause to Trump's regime change campaign, and it's an admission of defeat, but it's not peace.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me of the Korean War armistice, which was 53, 54, which didn't end the war. The war still, there has been no peace, no actual cessation of hostilities between the South and the North. Actually, Trump attempted to end that, and that was sabotaged as well by the same elements that will seek to sabotage the Iran war, an actual ceasefire with Iran, and an actual durable peace with Iran. Many of the same elements, at least, and they were less powerful than the Israel lobby and the Zionist movement is. So we're sort of in a frozen conflict, and it's very obvious who opposes this deal in the West, and particularly in the United States. Sorry. The same elements that brought Trump into this war, the same elements that sat Trump down in the Situation Room and told him how this war was going to begin and lied to him, this doddering, kind of bought off figure, on how the war would be won instantly in a kind of Venezuela style triumph through decapitation strikes, which within 2 to 4 days would end the so-called regime and bring about mass opposition and the Iranian public rising up along with possibly the Kurdish proxies in order to basically dissolve the Islamic Republic of Iran. That was Benjamin Netanyahu and his proxies. Benjamin Netanyahu came here in DC in February and told Trump how it was going to be. Trump went along with it. No one within his cabinet or among his military intelligence principals actually stood up to him, other than, I think, General Dan Kane, chairman of the Joint Chiefs, who was leaking his opposition to the press and knew that they would blow through interceptor stocks, THAADs. They'd have to reposition THAADs from South Korea, which South Korea got at great cost to its relations with China, which costed economically. THAADs and Patriot batteries, PAC-3s would have to go over from Ukraine to defend Israel. And it was all, I said it at the beginning, it was a Zionist war. And it was going to fail. Everything that took place could have easily been predicted. And so this sort of consolidates the failure of Operation Epstein Fury. And now it's very clear, once again, who was responsible for this war. When you see Mark Levin fulminating, when you see Mark Thiessen fulminating, when you see Mark Dubowitz fulminating, these marks, what, I don't know, what Snoop Dogg might call mark-ass busters, are all out there actually trying to make marks of the American public, but we're not marks anymore, or VIX. Everyone can see that this was a failed and very economically destructive Zionist war, and there should be recriminations and repercussions and retribution against these characters. That's what we would like to see. Unfortunately, I don't think Trump is going to be able to do that. You know, if I were Trump and I were in the war room right now, and I don't even know if he has a real actual war room, the way that, you know, that's based around his own thinking. I would be using every element in the media to humiliate these characters, denounce them, and I would even be launching investigations into FDD, Foundation for the Defense of Democracies, which was the main Israeli think tank planted in Washington, which devised this entire war from start to finish, starting with the decapitation strikes and moving into the so-called naval siege. They even, through Jared Kushner, had one of their staff members, Nick, what's his name? I'll think of it in a second. Nick Stewart, placed on the negotiation team to oversee the naval siege, which was just was deepening this neo-Suez crisis. So, you know, you really want to punish these elements if you're Trump, but I think these elements will eventually, along with figures in the Senate like Roger Wicker, chair of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, who had been pushing for a renewed like Epstein Fury 2.0 as late as June 9th. The Wall Street Journal's editorial board, even elements in Fox News, obviously Mark Levin, they're going to come for Trump along with the Democrats and call him, the Democrats will be calling him Taco. You know, Trump always chickens out, trying to paint him as weak for making this deal. And I don't think Trump will be strong enough to stand up against that or to do anything about the Israeli invasion of Lebanon, which is ongoing and has been used as a lever to sabotage this deal.
Well, I just wonder if we'll even get to a point where there'll be anything for neocons to push back on, because Trump says that this is a nuclear deal, but really it's the same thing if you listen to J.D. Vance today. So he made what I think is a contradictory statement, talking about the conditions under which the U.S. would lift sanctions on Iran, which for Iran is the biggest issue. For the U.S., the biggest issue is supposedly Iran's nuclear program. But we know Iran's already accepted constraints on that repeatedly under the JCPOA, in the talks that were brokered by Oman before the war, in the proposal since. So that part can be addressed. The issue for Iran is, will the U.S. lift its crippling sanctions that are designed to prevent Iran from having a functioning economy? And if you listen to J.D. Vance today, he's already offered contradictory conditions. But note there, the crucial thing he said there is the main condition, the condition for sanctions really from the U.S. is Iran constraining its nuclear weapons program. But Iran did that already under the JCPOA. But Trump broke that. But why did Trump break that? Because he wanted regime change. He wanted regime change because Iran resists U.S.-Israeli hegemony. And so he's been demanding Iran surrender on that front as well, that Iran stop supporting groups that resist U.S.-Israeli hegemony, namely Hezbollah. And Iran hasn't budged on that. And here's J.D. Vance, after just saying to CBS News that the only condition for sanctions relief is Iran's nuclear program. He then adds a second condition. So if that's the case, then forget it. There's not going to be a deal. So all this is, and this is what I think, this is what ultimately will blow up the peace talks. Trump will insist on this, that Iran cut ties to Hezbollah. Iran won't. And so everyone will just walk away. So what we'll have is a status quo ante. Hooray for Trump. The Strait of Hormuz has been reopened. Maybe in the process, there'll be some limited sanctions relief on like the export of some Iranian products. Maybe a token amount of unstolen assets. But in terms of an actual deal, if this is the condition, as Vance just put it, and it's not just about nuclear, but it's also about Iran supporting its allies who resist U.S.-Israeli hegemony, then there's no peace deal.
Yeah, and that was, I mean, this is in the tradition of Steve Witkoff, the envoy, constantly shifting the goalposts. He would go to Iran, they'd have, or go to Oman, they'd have good talks, and then he would go back to Washington and say something entirely different.
Yeah.
For example, about Iran's alliances or ballistic missiles. And, you know, he would say, and I remember Steve Witkoff said early on in the war, they're closing the Gulf of Hormuz. They can't do that. He didn't even know what the Strait of Hormuz was. There's a lack of understanding of the Iranian perspective and just the basic facts about the technical side of Iran's nuclear program or about the region. And J.D. Vance is supposed to be the restrainer here, who is in favor of the deal, and he can't seem to articulate any clear conditions. Everything's based on benchmarks. Reminds me of the Oslo Accords, where nothing was set in stone. There were no borders. Everything is contingent on further talks. Then you have the fact that insurance companies aren't going to back shipping for the next 6 to 12 months unless there is stability, which means this deal has to be enforced by the U.S. in Lebanon and elsewhere in order to open up the Strait of Hormuz and provide long-term stability. The U.S. is making everything contingent on Iran. It's actually contingent on the U.S. and U.S. leadership. And the U.S. has obviously been completely compromised by its relationship with Israel. So there's another reason to believe this won't actually open up the strait or provide economic relief. But obviously Trump is in panic mode. He's becoming a panicking because the midterms are coming up. The bottom has dropped out of his base. Young men are turning on Trump in record numbers. There's a new New York Times poll showing he's lost 10% of young white male voters in the last month or so. The numbers are horrible on this war. So he has good reason to want a deal, but he's not going to be able, I don't think he's going to be able to enforce it. And there will be I think we're looking at a frozen conflict. At the same time, those who got Trump into this war, as I said, they're not happy about what's going on. Mark Dubowitz, you know, if you're suffering economically in any way, you know, costs too much to fill up your tank and you drive for a living, you drive Uber, you deliver food, whatever, or, you know, you have a long commute. If you're a farmer and fertilizer costs are through the roof and you're at risk of losing your farm.
And going back to Witkoff for a second, just before I forget, you know, he really illustrates how completely captive this administration is to the establishment war lobby, where initially he was talking about accepting the enrichment levels of the JCPOA, which were like 3.67%. He accepted that publicly. And then all it took was like a one-day freak out from the Israel lobby and other neocons, and he backtracked immediately and was now then claiming zero enrichment. You know, so that's how easily this administration caves to the slightest pressure from the war lobby. And there's no indication that despite all the marks having their freakouts, that much has changed.
Yeah, I was watching him on Mario Nafal, and he kept interrupting. He was like all geeked out. It was wild to watch Dubowitz in the sort of like Hitler in his bunker. He really sees this as an apocalyptic moment. But really, what it just means is what it is for the Israel First lobby is a setback, a major setback, and there's going to be a recalibration of the U.S.-Israel relationship. There will have to be because of this, because of the deep unpopularity of themselves and of Israel in the United States. They're going to have to bury it behind opaque cooperation initiatives, which we'll talk about later. But I do not see this deal holding. Now, at the same time, I don't see in the near term a major conflict restarting, but who's to say? I mean, it would be too politically crippling for Trump.
Well, it depends where, right? Because what about Lebanon?
Yeah.
Israel will do, like, now the question is, what does the deal say about Lebanon? We've heard leaks from the Iranian side that it calls on Israel to withdraw. I personally doubt that Trump will agree to that. But there must be something in there, some language addressing Lebanon, because Iran would not make a deal without including Lebanon. And Israel now, their path to blowing up peace and restarting war is through Lebanon, where they have this goal of wiping out Hezbollah and its base of support, which is a lot of people. That's why they've displaced more than 1.5 million people and killed more than 3,000 since March, because they're trying to destroy the popular base for Hezbollah. And so that's the question that I have this week is, like, what is the memorandum of understanding, if anything, say about Lebanon, and will Trump finally restrain Israel from its aggression there?
Here's a UN ambassador and longtime Israel lobby plant, Mike Waltz, on Lebanon.
Regime change war. But, there's some amazing comments in there. First of all, he says, we're trying to de-link Lebanon from the Iran deal. Well, you're the ones who've been insisting forever that Iran surrender by giving up its support for Hezbollah. So now, because Iran insists on Israel stopping attacks on Lebanon, now all of a sudden Lebanon and Iran have to be de-linked, when you're the ones who've been insisting that Iran can't support Hezbollah. So Iran can't support Hezbollah, but also, but by contrast, you have every right to support Israel destroying Lebanon, where Hezbollah is. I mean, you think Iran or Hezbollah are going to go for that? It's the peak of hypocrisy. And then, of course, he refers to Hezbollah as a cancer. And so what is he saying there? He's not just talking about a group of people with weapons. He's talking about a political movement. There's a part of the largest political bloc in the Lebanese parliament. Hezbollah is a member of that coalition that has, like, I don't know, 61 seats or something, 62 seats, maybe even more. They'd have more if the Lebanese vote properly reflected the population. But regardless, he's calling a huge portion of the country, half of it, I don't know, maybe less than half, maybe more than half, a cancer. You're muted, Max.
And that's to reinforce the Israeli policy, which is ethnic cleansing, to remove 1 million Shia Lebanese citizens from the South, which is what they've been attempting to do all the way all since the ceasefire of 2024. This is always left out. Over 1,000 ceasefire violations by Israel before Hezbollah entered the fight after the start of Operation Epstein Fury attacking Iran. And then Israel's proceeding to impose a yellow line, the same yellow line that it has imposed in the Gaza Strip, where it has seized 60% of the entire Gaza Strip. And what does it do behind the yellow line? First of all, no one's allowed to cross the yellow line. You get shot if you try to go back to your home. Then they bring in D9 operators to demolish the homes. Each D9 operator gets paid per demolished home. They blow up entire villages. And so large parts of southern Lebanon, which are the sites of so much human civilizational heritage, are being subjected to mass demolition. The city of Tyre, which is a biblical era city, is being bombarded and destroyed as we speak. 20, 30 Lebanese people are killed every day. And the point is to uproot Shia Lebanese citizens, just as Palestinians have been uprooted in Gaza and have been uprooted since the Nakba. And that's why Waltz is referring to them as a cancer. And it is an attack on civilians because Israel cannot defeat Hezbollah on the battlefield and is suffering its own losses day after day, which are becoming a huge political problem for Netanyahu, but he has nothing else but this war. And that's the other, and then here's the other issue. Netanyahu cannot allow peace to take place because of his own legal problems. And if peace, if there, I wouldn't call it peace, but if there's sort of an interregnum between wars, because Israel is always in a state of permanent war, Netanyahu loses and he will ultimately be unseated. His coalition will come apart. The country will start to focus on issues like the Haredi draft bill to draft ultra-Orthodox. You know, as before October 7th, Israel was in a sort of political civil war. And it'll go back to that state. And Netanyahu will be unseated. Netanyahu also has this problem where he needs Trump. He desperately needs Trump because of his own prosecution. Remember, Trump sent Mike Huckabee to sit in the witness gallery supporting Benjamin Netanyahu when he was going to testify in one of his corruption trials. Trump has been putting pressure on the Israeli president, Isaac Herzog, to pardon Benjamin Netanyahu, which he refuses to do to this point. And so Netanyahu needs Trump. And if Netanyahu defies Trump too strongly, that's his ass. So the war is what is postponing the inevitable for Netanyahu, and he needs this war. In Lebanon, just as Israel, is the whole Israeli military intelligence apparatus is in support of this war. And they believe they need to establish what they call a buffer zone, which is an ethnic cleansing zone, a kill zone. And here's one of the important linchpins of Netanyahu's coalition, Itamar Ben-Gvir. And it's the same thing we're going to see from Schumer and the Democrats, or a similar thing where they're going to accuse Trump of chickening out and then making a deal that's worse than the JCPOA, at least from an Israeli perspective. Because, I mean, it will release lots of assets if it goes through.
It's just mind-boggling. The Democrats in the Senate are led by a guy, Chuck Schumer, who opposed Iran's JCPOA and has lobbied against diplomacy with Iran ever since. And yeah, that was his main. Remember, he made that video of Trump, you know, Taco Trump, no side deals with Iran, you know, as if like he thought the American public would join him in being outraged at the prospect of diplomacy with Iran, because people really want to ensure that Israel has the right to go kill as many people in the region as it wants to. They would join Chuck Schumer in outrage about that. Chuck Schumer recently marched with, who was it? Smotrich, who was at.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think he knew he was going to be marching with them, but that's what you get when you go to the Israel Day parade, which Mamdani boycotted. It wasn't just him. It was also Mordechai Eliyahu, the heritage minister, who called for nuking Gaza and blowing up the Al-Aqsa compound, was marching. I mean, I lost track of all the fascists who were marching, but it's like, what do you think you're going to get at the Israel Day parade? It's like if I went to a pride parade and I was suddenly outraged that there were like out and proud gay men dancing on floats to techno music. Like, I'd be like, oh no, I condemn this. I condemn the rampant display of homosexuality at Pride. And then, you know, all the Democrats come out and condemn Smotrich. It's like, what do you think this is? You're celebrating an ethno-supremacist project and you don't want racist mass murderers there who are wanted by the ICC? Like, I condemn women taking off their tops at Mardi Gras with beads around their necks. This is not what I expected. So, yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. That was like a big win for Mamdani, even though he let the parade take place. Like, I would just like have the whole parade lead to like a giant series of paddy wagons, or police wagons, I should say. No offense to my Irish friends. Police wagons, and everyone just gets like shepherded in and taken off to The Hague. But I'm not in charge, and I don't have to answer to Jessica Tisch. I don't know what that's like. It's like Kennedy and J. Edgar Hoover is like Mamdani and Tisch. But back to the lecture at hand, Lebanon, just before I think we move on, what's happening in Lebanon. I mean, it's horrific. I was just in Dearborn, Michigan, which, as everyone knows, is a sort of center of Arab American life and civic culture just outside Detroit. And I gave a talk at a fundraiser for an independent media outlet called TMJ, which some young people are starting there. And I got to meet a lot of the local Lebanese American population. And what they would tell me was that there are memorials happening every day in Dearborn, or at least every week, for families, entire families that have been killed. 10 people killed in one strike, 12 people. A couple that was giving me a ride to the banquet hall or the event hall. I mentioned this to them, and that I heard there were a lot of memorials, and the wife said to me, yeah, my cousin was just killed by Israel while he was farming his land. They're just killing people. And no one is unscathed by Israel's campaign of mass murder and ethnic cleansing in Lebanon in that community. And what Israel's doing is actually attacking the people that are closest to the land, which means they're attacking farmers, they're attacking conservationists, they're killing, and they're spraying farms with glyphosate, specifically Lebanese Shias who are being subjected to ethnic cleansing. And that's what's happening in Lebanon.
And in the West Bank too, we got to mention like what has just happened recently, which everyone just continues to ignore because, the Iran aspect just takes over everything else in Lebanon too. But what happened in the West Bank, was it last week? I've lost track, but Israeli settlers set fire to a mostly Christian village town of Taibe. Set it ablaze, and then when Palestinians tried to put the fire out, they shot at the firefighters. This is right. This is a major village, like a major Christian village in the West Bank, and these types of attacks on the land in the West Bank happen every single day in this partnership between Israeli settlers and the Israeli military, the occupying Israeli military.
Yeah. More double tap strikes, triple tap strikes on rescuers, firefighters. Also, while I was in Dearborn, I'll put up video of this later today or tomorrow, I visited the Wall of Tears, which is, I think, the first memorial in the United States for the children who were murdered by Israel during the Gaza genocide between October 7th and July 2025. And it's 4 long panels with just names, some photos of all the children that have been killed. It's really shocking to see it. It's a Holocaust memorial.